Good evening. I'm Susan Gorin, a supervisor for the 1st District, and I really want to thank Ariel Kubu-Jones for organizing our conversations with fire survivors once again. And I hope you're all feeling better about where we are. We're looking at the green grass that is so prominent in the fire burned areas, and some of the wildflowers poking up and some of the trees recovering. I know spring is in the air. Actually, summer is in the air. Well, we've had some warm weather. So thank you for having faith in and moving forward in the journey. It's not easy. As I work towards completion of my fire rebuild, I know how arduous and time consuming it really is to move forward. So I congratulate you all. If you're not on, I'm pulling up my agenda again because it blacked out. Most of you are on our list of fire survivors. If you're not, please let others know that you should be included on our list, because Ariel Kubu-Jones, now our district director, will outreach to you and to let you know about important information along the way, because we get updates frequently and we want to include you in future conversations for our fire survivors. And this conversation tonight is appropriate for our fire survivors most recently with our Walbridge and glass fires, but even relevant to those folks who lost their homes and their properties and had property damage during the Sonoma complex fires and the tub fire for almost 4 years ago. So we're glad that you're here with us tonight. And please note that Ariel Kubu-Jones' email is on the bottom of the agenda that was just on the screen, and you can make note of it again. And we'll be sharing information on the slides throughout this meeting. We'll send this information out to our list in the next couple of days, which you can certainly forward along to your friends, neighbors, and anyone who might be interested. So don't worry about writing everything down now. We're recording it live, and you can refer back to it on our Facebook website and or on YouTube, actually. And we are so glad that you're with us this evening. So housekeeping tonight. First, the chat and the Q&A section of the Zoom has been turned off, and Ariel or I will let you know when it's appropriate. We're going to turn it back on so that we can get your questions answered after our great panel of presenters have completed their presentations. And we try to be patient. We'll answer your questions one at a time. And if for some reason you don't get your questions answered, we will make note of them and we'll forward the answers to you with Ariel's notes of the meeting a little later on. So if you've called in, you could hit *9 to raise your hand when it's time, and *6 to unmute yourself, and we'll give you some directions a little bit later. And again, this meeting is recorded, so please refer back to it. A lot of great information. So I just want to tell you, there is a brief update from the county perspective. We know some of you have been following the discussions at the Board of Supervisors regarding vegetation management. There are opportunities in the future, very, very near future, for you and your neighborhoods to follow through and send in a request for funds for some of your vegetation management needs. And I really want to encourage all of you to follow through on developing the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, CWPP, and prioritize those vegetation management needs, because I would like to emphasize in our grant requests those communities who've actually taken the time to develop the CWPP and prioritize the projects, knowing that we will not be able to fund all of your projects. And so we want to encourage you to prioritize so that we can maybe fulfill some of those grant requests. And so now I'd like Ariel to take over part of the conversation, introduce our panelists, and lead us off in the discussion. Ariel.
Thank you, Susan. I want you to introduce the panelists, but I do have a few updates to share first.
Okay, we can do that.
So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. So as many of you know, we did a survey for our glass fire survivors, and there were three kind of main issues that came up. One was insurance, one was debris removal, and the third was kind of what we're talking about tonight with these panelists, large scale land management issues. So on those other two topics, I just wanted to let you know that United Policyholders is starting some carrier specific groups. So where folks who have State Farm can connect with other folks who have State Farm. This is a great resource. It was really helpful to our 2017 survivors, and I'm so glad they're getting that off the ground. I will share the direct link to those groups when they're available. It should be up this week. And secondly, a brief debris removal update. I've been getting emails from folks, anxious to know when their debris will be removed with specific questions about that. I can help field the more idiosyncratic requests to Cal OES, but they are not moving as fast as any of us would like, but they are still saying that all the properties will be cleared by May 1st. They also have just increased the number of crews that we have in the county. So we're hoping that with the weather and the increased crews, we will be able to get to more parcels and hit that May 1st date. Also, there was a mailer, I guess, that was sent out. It looks like this, and this is incorrect. So the county called them on it right away, but this where you can get tree removal from Cal OES, even if you did private structure debris removal, that is incorrect. You do have to have an ROE on file to be able to get the Cal OES tree removal. And then finally, the PG&E, I know that's a huge concern for a lot of our folks, that they cut down a lot of trees. I wanted to let you know that the county is working through the Rural County Representatives of California and the CPUC to see if they can get PG&E to come, get rid of some of those logs that they left. We're not going to get a resolution on that until about May. It's a multi-county effort, but just an update on that. I know folks wish that they didn't cut them in the first place. And I don't disagree, but at the very least, we hope we can get you some assistance in dealing with this massive amount of wood. And that's kind of all I have to share on those fronts.
Thank you, Ariel. I really appreciate that. Just a personal note during my rebuild, if you have chosen to rebuild, please have your contractor work with your insurance company, because often your insurance policies will specify that you are due additional funds through code upgrades and fire resistant upgrades. And that is what our contractor has done with our insurance carrier. And we've been able to access additional funds from our insurance carrier through the rebuild process. So don't take no for an answer, and have your contractor work directly with the insurance company to submit the bills and give them a good idea of what is rebuilding and what is the code requirements above the rebuilding and replacement of the structure. So thank you so much. And now tonight is all about the environmental concerns. We've gotten we have a lot of people reaching out to us who are very concerned about what this fire and some of the tree work done right after the fact means for the ecosystems and watersheds around their homes. And they should be concerned, as Ariel said. Ecological recovery is complex and it takes time, and these landscapes, sadly, may never recover in our lifetimes. But it's important to know what we could be doing, should be doing to help the ecosystem recover the best we can. We have a great group here tonight who will tell you a bit about what they all do and their organizations, and answer your questions about the specific issues with your areas and parcels. First, I want to introduce Yvonne Shu. She does many, many things, But tonight she is representing the Office of Resiliency and Recovery. She's going to briefly go over the recent board decisions, some of which I've just given a little hint about, to allocate some of the PG&E funds to shovel-ready projects in time for this fire season. It's my pleasure to introduce Yvonne Shu.
Thank you, Supervisor Gorin. Yes, I'm Yvonne Shu. I'm an analyst in the County Administrator's Office, and I'm here to provide a brief update on last week's board meeting and some of the decisions made there related to vegetation management, specifically from the PG&E settlement. So we agreed to establish an interim group to facilitate allocating funds for near-term projects. So this is what Supervisor Gorin was referencing. We are very quickly trying to put together a simple process for community groups to apply for funding. And just so you know what that bucket looks like, it's a floor of $2 million, but potentially up to $4 million. And so we are going to be leaning, I'm not on that actual criteria creating committee, but we do have a report that is included in the board items from last week that specifies some kind of general ideas for criteria. And we're also looking for projects that are ready to go. And so, you know, the fire season is getting bigger and bigger and longer every year. So anything that can be done proactively before our traditional fire season, late summer, early fall, we're going to be looking at those as well. But we're going to make it the umbrella big in terms of submissions. So we encourage everybody out there to apply when we have that process up and going, and we will be sure to communicate that information to the supervisors in terms of relating how to do that. Related to that, we are putting together an interim governance group that will help to make decisions on the funding for the community activities. And it's going to be comprised of groups from our resource departments. So groups such as Ag and Open Space, Regional Parks, Sonoma Water, and there are a few others in there, including UCCE. And we are hoping to get a representative from CAL FIRE as well. Related to that also, because there's a lot of work involved in coordinating this group and also moving forward in terms of thinking of the long-term governance. The board approved funding for a 3-year vegetation management coordinator position to help aid this group and also kind of serve as a point of contact for vegetation management at the county. Finally, $500,000 was allocated to Santa Rosa Junior College to help their vegetation management workforce development programs. And so, you know, if we think about long-term, you know, county vegetation management efforts, more local staffing or people able to do that work, and also people developing their own kind of careers locally is something that we are looking forward to in terms of, you know, our community and building that up. So that is also a piece of this, of the decisions that were made last week. Thank you.
You're on mute, Supervisor.
Am talking away. Thanks, Yvonne. How do people access that information about when the request deadlines are nearing?
So that is currently being developed, and as soon as that timeline and the process and the way to submit is solidified, we're gonna make sure that you know, and as well as the community out there, we're gonna broadcast it as widely as possible.
Great. So stay tuned. And I know Ariel will be sending out information to all of our fire survivors regarding the process and the deadline for grant requests. So thanks so much, Yvonne. And now let's go to the Sonoma Ecology Center. Just an amazing organization. I love them all, that does so much good work in the community in helping our fire survivors and our creek sheds and creek restoration and so much more. And so Caitlin Cornwall is here. No, Jason Mills is here to talk about burn landscapes and erosion concerns. And he'll be available to answer your questions after the presentation. Jason.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Gorin, for facilitating this event. It's actually great timing to have this As we near the end of our rainy season here, we've completed our toxic runoff containment work, and we managed to wrap up over 350 structures in the glass fire footprint. So
Bite
now,
your tongue, Jason. We need more rain.
I know, mixed blessing. So yeah, so those toxins didn't get into the streams. Now we need water for our vegetation to come back. And, now's a really good time to start assessing vegetation, because it's interesting to see some of these post-fire sites can actually result in higher fire fuels following the fire, which you wouldn't think to be the case. But when you have all that standing dead material, you have invasive species moving in, now is kind of the optimal timing to start dealing with that vegetation. Invasive species, they move in really quickly with disturbance. Whatever the land use history is of your site will become very clear following fire. If you can get out there and contain these invasives, you can actually shift the trajectories over the long term. So now is really the time to act. And when you look at the fire fuel scene, it makes a lot of sense to bring in an informed contractor who knows about managing vegetation over the long term. And that's exactly what we try to do here at the Ecology Center, is reduce fuels with kind of an ecological approach. So you may notice ladder fuels coming in with French broom. You may notice acacia erupting in your riparian systems. Now is the time to get ahead of it and develop a long-term plan and management approach, or you're looking at more resources, and the problem's continuing exponentially. So another interesting thing this time of year is that the deciduous species are starting to show their true colors, and the new leaves are coming out. So a lot of the deciduous trees that you may have thought were actually standing dead still have life in them. So we've been holding off to do our tree assessments till this time of year. And it's really a shame to drop those few trees that may have survived the fire. So now we can do a better tree assessment to see, what the status is of your woody vegetation around your house. A lot of these things are going to come back, and you're going to have a lot of stump sprouting. Stump sprouting can be good or bad, depending on what's coming back. A lot of our introduced invasive species are adapted to fire as well. They readily stump sprout. Now's a good time to nip them in the bud and bring out somebody who understands, species composition and what's going on your landscape. And last but not least, it kind of, it's a tragic thing for this to happen. And I think what's important now is to learn from it and not repeat the cycle. And it's an opportunity to kind of re-envision your space and develop kind of like a fire-wise, eco-friendly landscape. So that's something at the Ecology Center we're also doing. We have a number of native species that are very beautiful, propagating at our native plant nursery. I think Supervisor Gorin paid a visit and picked up a few native trees just a while back. So we're a resource in that capacity as well. And we are designing these native plant landscapes as well that are more defensible. So really trying to cover all the needs for the community. We're just a resource here to help. So feel free to contact us. The best way to get a hold of my department is restoration@sonomaecologycenter.org. And thanks again.
You're on mute again, Supervisor.
You would think that I would know that. Thank you, Jason. I've planted those tiny little trees. They've begun to leaf out, and I want to keep them alive during our very, very dry spring. So I'm trying to get water to them. It was amazing to me to have a tour through Hood Mountain Regional Park and see totally barren landscapes with little sprouts of green coming up through the soil char or around the stumps. So you're absolutely right. It's a manzanita and certainly comes up. Madrone thrives, bay thrives, whether we want it or not. Thistle, it seems to be in abundance in a lot of some of those not so friendly species, indeed. So next we have, and thank you so much, a familiar face, Raymond Baltar, also with the Sonoma Ecology Center. And you're going to talk a little bit about biochar. What in the heck is biochar? Don't we have everything charred? Isn't that good? So tell us all about biochar.
Well, thank you, Susan. I appreciate it very much. I'm actually going to share my screen here real quickly. See if I can do this. Okay. One more click here, I should have it. Okay, so I'm the director of the Sonoma Biochar Initiative, as well as Biochar Projects Manager for the Sonoma Ecology Center. We do many different things, but one of the things we do and have done for many years is to teach landowners how to produce their own biochar and do it in a number of different ways. Biochar is essentially a form of charcoal that's specifically good for use in agriculture. In other words, it's not exactly the same kind of material you use in your barbecue, because you want to have the pure carbon part of it and have no volatiles in it. So we teach people how to cook those volatiles out, and then you can use that biochar in your garden or in other areas. Wildfires do create some biochar, but it's actually a very small amount, depending on the intensity of the fire, et cetera. So I'm just going to go over real quickly here. I wasn't sure exactly what to talk about here, so I have a sort of a quick slide deck I'm going to go through on different ways to produce biochar, and then some of the attributes of biochar at the end. So let me go ahead and scroll forward here. Hang on. Okay, so typically in a typical fuels reduction type situation, one of the ways to deal with the material is to what's called lop and scatter. It's good in a way because the nutrients are left on site, but as you can see, it can be a fire hazard as well. And most of the CO2 returns to the atmosphere over time. So there's also mastication and chipping, which is just the process of grinding up the material, and often usually leaving it on the forest floor. Sometimes the chips are taken off site and used for landscaping, etc. Nutrients are left on site. That's a good thing. CO2, however, returns to the atmosphere over time. Most of it does, and the soil can actually be damaged as well. And again, there's not any one way to do it. There's really a combination of ways to manage this material. And really, we need to kind of focus on doing a little bit of all of it. So one of the ways that this material is dealt with most often is open burn piles. And this is really the worst possible way to do it. It's often very polluting, and the CO2 returns directly to the atmosphere. However, there are ways to manage your burn pile. We call it a conservation burn, which is much, much cleaner, reduces the smoke, and you can actually produce biochar out of it. We've taught this to many vineyard owners, but we're also working with forestry people as well. You take this material, you grind it up a little bit, and you can either add it, back to your farm or take it off site for use. We've now been experimenting with what are called flame cap kilns. These significantly reduce the smoke as well and can save up to 50% of the carbon. And every pound of biochar or carbon that is saved saves 2.5 pounds of CO2 from escaping into the atmosphere. So the reason I came into this originally was from the climate side, because it's one of the few things that we can do very readily to reduce the amount of CO2 on the natural climate solution side. And so as we are learning about these techniques, we're learning how to do it better, more efficiently, and obviously with less smoke as well. So these are just a couple of other pictures. We recently got a grant from the North Coast Resource Partnership to build a kit of these and then to let some of our grant partners, the Redwood Forest Foundation and the Potter Valley Tribe, use them. And we are actually going to have a set of 5 of these available at the Ecology Center to be able to help landowners process material they have. And again, this is just kind of showing some of the biochar that comes out of it. It can be very high quality material. And again, I'm just going over this really quickly. This shows what's called a carbonator. It is a way to process a lot of material. It can process up to 15 tons of material per hour. And it also produces biochar, and between 10 and 15% by volume. So it can produce a very large amount of biochar, and this biochar can then be added right back into the forest soil profile. And charcoal is actually something that is missing from a lot of forestry environments, obviously not those that have been burned. So, but anyway, this is another option. We are now experimenting. We recently got a CAL FIRE grant to produce biochar using one of these sort of small scale pyrolysis systems, using chips that had previously been landfilled. So we're not only saving the methane and CO2 that's released in landfilling, we're going to be able to produce biochar as well. So again, just kind of going through this quickly. I have just a few more slides. So why is biochar important? It's really an investment in carbon drawdown, and it's been cited as a significant natural climate solution by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, the Nature Conservancy, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and many others. So it's one of the few things that we can actually do. And the more, again, we produce, the more we'll actually be pulling carbon out of the carbon cycle. And it can last for hundreds or even thousands of years in that state. So quickly, again, I just have a couple more slides. This is what biochar looks like under a microscope. You think of it as sort of like coral incubates life in the sea. Biochar does the same thing in soil, and it acts like a sponge, and it's a condo for microorganisms, and it also helps retain water and nutrients. So those are just some of the benefits. Again, there's many, many other uses for it. It's being used as a substitute for peat in potting soil. You can use it for in wine cave insulation. There's a lot of different ways that biochar is being used. So we would love to have seen all that material that's coming off of the fire areas turned into biochar, but there really, unfortunately, isn't a place where we can do that right now. But we're hoping in the future to be able to have a series of small scale pyrolysis systems up and down California that can handle this material in a responsible way. So just quickly, biochar, we want to start experimenting with biochar use in wattles because biochar adsorbs heavy metals. And this can actually be used, these kinds of wattles could be used around fire damaged homes before the first rains to help capture some more of that material. And you know, mixed with wood chips especially, it's especially effective. So that's pretty much it. We're just, you know, want to try to change the mindset around taking material that's just considered waste and let's just get rid of it and put it somewhere. And let's turn it into something that's really beneficial, not only for soil, but you know, many, many other uses as well. So that's what we're working towards at the Ecology Center. Again, you can contact me directly if you want more information. I just went through this really quickly. We do give trainings on conservation burning and the kilns, and we're happy to work with any landowner that's interested in learning more about this. So thank you very much. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you so much. This is the discussion I was most fascinated by because I know very little about the process, and I bet we'll have a lot of questions on it. But the very first question, Raymond, do you need a burn permit for this?
Yes, absolutely. You need a bird permit. Yep. And you have to follow all the regular rules. And that's part of the training that we do. We're very supportive of the air districts. In fact, the air districts right now are helping us work on a proposal with CAPCOA to do emissions testing on the conservation burn and the kilns so that they have the kind of data they need to make these processes a best practice.
And we're close to the end of the burn season through ABAG and North County pollution. Is that right?
That's correct. It ends on May 1st or April 30th. So we don't have a lot of time right now, but this is sort of planting the seed to get ready for next season, which will usually
Right.
start after the first rains.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. And now finally, I get to introduce Caitlin Cornwall, and Caitlin's going to talk with us about resilient landscapes, information that we all need as we rebuild and work on preparing the land. Sonoma Ecology Center has developed this presentation in partnership with other local organizations. Caitlin, take it away.
Thank you. Ariel, could you start putting the slides up? I want to, Raymond and Jason have been talking about larger areas of the land, and I'm going to come in a little bit toward the home, the 100 feet of defensible space around homes and other buildings. And I'm just going to whiz through these slides quite quickly. This is sort of a teaser because what we've been doing is giving much more in-depth presentations to neighborhood groups, homeowners associations, and other audiences to help plan and maintain these really critical and important areas right around our homes. And since many of you are designing and rebuilding, this is really important information for you. But so this is just sort of a whirlwind tour. So next. This program that we're calling Resilient Landscapes is designed to help people know how to have defensible space that is safer, defensible, but also beautiful, sustainable, and biodiverse. Next. This is the team that has created this this workshop and this website that I'll put some more details on later. Next. So these are the basic principles, and I think just as you're designing and rethinking, these are just the most critical things. The home is the most important thing. For most of us, our home is or was the most flammable thing on our properties. So that is really the place to focus first. But then from working from there out, this ember-free zone right around the house that I'll show pictures of is absolutely critical. Choosing the right plants in the first place, very essential. And then your landscape, your defensible space is really only as good as your maintenance. I'll talk more about that and show pictures. There are some individualities among properties, of course, steep slopes, different plant communities, they all need a little bit different approach. But there is some science on this. It's not completely and 100% baked in, but one of the pieces of science that is really strongly proven is that the best way to keep your house from burning down, again, is to focus on the house and the areas right around the house. So next. So the great thing is that your defensible space can provide a lot of different functions. It can definitely keep you safer, but there's not a conflict between that and things like supporting biodiversity. And the way to achieve both of those goals, safety and biodiversity, primarily is to use native species. We advocate at least 70 or 80% of the plants in your 100-foot space being native to this area. Planting plants densely but in islands creates more food and more shelter for wildlife. This is a picture of a beautiful butterfly, a pollinator, but this is true. This island approach is true for all kinds of wildlife. Integrated pest management is really important. Basically, that means only using pesticides when you have to, when other methods have been tried and not successful. And then also it's important to have some kind of water source for wildlife in your defensible space. Next. Critical point to avoid over clearing if you open up too much open space in your defensible 100-foot zone, what you end up doing is creating erosion. And you end up inviting, as this inset photo shows, you end up inviting in invasive species that love the sun and that can be highly flammable. This is this picture focuses on invasive shrubs, but also just a lot of invasive grasses that will come in if you clear too much of your canopy away. So that's an important design feature to think about. Next. So what's really what's important about design and maintenance is that you want to think about a landscape plan that you can keep free of dead and dying plant material. So that requires maintenance, yes, and it also requires choosing good plants up front. These islands, again, you want islands of plants with non-combustible pathways in between them, and that breaks up the pathway of fire. And I'll show some more pictures of all of these things, but you don't want plants or mulch too close to your buildings. And then limbing up is important. You want to prevent those ladder fuels from establishing. Next. So our workshop goes through in kind of some detail what to put on the ground. And the answer is that it's slightly different in different distances from your house, because further away from the house, it's okay to have combustible mulch. And closer in, you want things that are going to be green all year or that are just absolutely not combustible, like stone and gravel. Next. Great design feature to think about is some kind of water feature, something that can slow down water, collect it, get it into the ground where it can feed the plants all year long. Next. So I have a few slides here just showing the different zones in relation to the house. This is the 0 to 5 foot zone. This is the most important zone for safety purposes. Is that it's supposed to be the ember-free zone. In other words, there should be nothing here that could allow an ember to turn into a flame. So it's important to minimize planting here and to have non-combustible materials and to maintain it really carefully. I know at my house, I'm still in the process of this because most of us have houses, and you may even have this after your house burned down. You have heritage plants right up next to the house. That's how a lot of our houses were landscaped. Next. These are just some more pictures of the 0 to 5 zone. Now moving out from 5 feet to 30 feet, this is where that island approach is really important, and using smaller shrubs and ground covers. Trees are not a no-no here. Trees are wonderful. They just need to be free of dead plant material, and they need to not have ladder fuels. Next. And then even further out, the furthest zone away from the house, this can get much more naturalistic. The need for non-flammability is not as high here. But again, maintenance is really critical. Next. So for any of you who are in the design phase, it's just really important to think about the right plant in the right place. How big will this plant want to get when it's mature? Will it be happy where it's planted? How much maintenance will it need? And will it take over? Those are just critical considerations when planning. Next. There's great substitutes for lawn. Next. Both grasses and low-lying shrubs that stay green. Next. And these are all natives, by the way. So that's it. This is my whirlwind tour. At the lower part of the slide is the partners on this program, and we have a new official partner now, Fire Safe Sonoma. So we really like to work with you about thinking about defensible space so that you can kind of have it all. You can have the safety and the beauty, the wildlife habitat, water conservation, property value, etc. And we are up for doing demonstration gardens with any of you, or taking people on tours of great places, leading a workshop where there can be a lot of Q&A, and doing consultations on individual parcels, and doing design build for hire. And I want to just wrap up all of our Ecology Center presentations by saying that we are constantly looking for public funding to help do all the kind of work that you've heard about. And our capacity is not unlimited to do these projects, but we would like to hear from you if you want any of this kind of work done on your land. Some of it we might be able to accommodate if you pay us and hire us now, or if we can put you into a grant proposal in the future. But we can only really do that if we can sort of demonstrate a demand for it. So I would encourage you to get in touch with us if any of this strikes your fancy. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin. I really appreciate the images were absolutely wonderful, especially as I'm now in re-landscaping mode around my fire build. And I know that particularly in Coffee Park and elsewhere, the city Marin Saving Water Partnerships had example landscape designs for the rebuilds. They were really sort of okay for houses that were close together. And in order to rebuild in the city, you need to have some rudimentary landscaping plan to be approved before they will give you the, and they'll check on it to give you the occupancy permit. The county, it's much looser. And of course, we have more space to play around with, more devastated vegetation for sure. But is that something that the Ecology Center has on your website? Is example this presentation, but also example landscape plans for people to look at?
We don't have drawn plans, but when we give this workshop in its full glory, we usually spend about 2 hours on it, and it can go into much more depth about individual species and individual layout ideas. We're working on that. We're working on working more with the landscape design profession. But we're submitting a grant actually to try to get more resources to do that. So not quite yet, but there's a lot more specific guidance in the full workshop.
Well, I think this is very, very helpful for me personally, but I hope everybody on the call will appreciate it as well. We have one more speaker tonight, and I'm very pleased to introduce another Jason Wells from the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And like our other Jason, he's working on the ground with fire survivors on their lands. And I hope he'll mention the forest recovery grant opportunity that the RCD has for folks like you to possibly get some funding for some of the large, daunting projects that you are contemplating on your lot. So Jason, thanks so much for being here. And it's a pleasure to work with all of your folks from the Resource Conservation District.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the great introduction. I'll just speak, and I will get to what you're talking about there with the North Bay Forest Improvement Program. But just briefly, the Resource Conservation Districts are a non-regulatory special district. We are a good partner in conservation. We've been around for 75 years in the county this year, so celebrating that milestone. And we generally are working with non-industrial small private landowners like yourselves to meet or agricultural producers also to improve natural resources and agricultural outcomes. So just a bunch of things came up during this whole thing. One thing I wanted to throw out there that I heard is that people were concerned about logs that might be on their property from when PG&E came through. I just want to let you know that it would be possible for you to consult with a registered professional forester and sell those logs still. So if PG&E doesn't end up coming and taking them for you, but you've got big old Douglas fir logs sitting on your property, there may still be a way to get that off, but you're going to want to try and get on that soon. So jumping into the opportunity that RCD has partnered with Rebuild North Bay Foundation to create a new incentives program. So I guess I'll share my screen. I've got a couple different just resources. Really, they're just websites that are drawn up already. So I don't know if that could be made possible. It's disabled for me at the moment.
Area, could you help them share?
Yep, I think I just fixed it.
Okay, very good.
Great.
So we'll start here. So this is the screen for the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, and it is a partnership with 5 different resource conservation districts in, so that is Goldridge, Sonoma, Lake, Napa, and Mendocino counties. And we have a $1.5 million grant from CAL FIRE using Proposition 68 funding to help incentivize private funding into forest improvements. So what's available in this program is things like thinning, planting, pruning, weed abatement, that kind of stuff. So really perfect for in a post-fire environment. As Jason Mills was saying, you know, in this post-fire environment, you're going to be getting a lot of your native trees. They're adapted to fire, they resprout, but there may still be a dead standing top. And so in order to modify fuels, what you would want to do is treat that upper dead standing material and then thin out the clump of new regrowth, so that instead of 6 to 10 sprouts at the bottom, you've got 2 or 3, where that plant is going to try and put more resources into those 2 or 3 stems. So you'll end up getting a larger, fewer trees that are larger faster. So we have funding that can help pay for treatments that are like that. And so we'll pay to help you thin that material and pile burn that material, or chip, or if you are on flat ground, we could use a masticator. Another thing I wanted to plug that I have available or will have available right now. So I just mentioned how almost all of the native tree species that are in the glass fire footprint resprout. So what's nice is you don't really have to reforest. If you're looking at a before stand condition that was primarily hardwoods, oaks, madrones, bay, whatever that happened to have been, you're mostly just going to be dealing with the trees that were still there as they resprout. The one huge exception is Douglas fir, which is a really important species when it comes to critical species like northern spotted owl or Sonoma tree vole. And so as I've been driving around in the glass fire area, it's one of the only places out of all the fires so far that I've thought actually could use reforestation. And so I'm thinking about north-facing slopes that would have historically had cooler, wetter conditions where Douglas fir might be. Certainly don't want to be planting that in a oak woodland, a historic area like that. But I think that there's going to be enough need, especially in and around like St. Helena Road, where I think that we could be doing some planting. So I have preemptively put in an order for 20,000 tree seedlings, which is about enough for 200 acres if you're doing a widely spaced conservation style planting. So I do have that available, and those trees would cost something like 50 cents each for the seedling, and then you would need to find someone to plant them. So so that's an available option as well. I've got that set up so we could work with you through the North Bay Forest Improvement Program to hire a contractor to put something like that in the ground. In general, what we are trying to get landowners to be doing is to be planning, much like what Caitlin was saying. A lot of what is going on around what is good or bad has to do with how well is it managed, right? And so thinking about what are our long-term goals, and really if there is bare soil and there's sunlight hitting it, something is going to grow there. So the question is, what is going to grow there? And this is the time where you have the opportunity to dictate what grows there. So whether or not you need to plant trees so that it is going to outcompete some of those invasives that come in, you know, this is the time to be thinking about what am I going to do this year, which is going to affect 5 years, 10 years, 50 years down the road. So planning is a really important thing. Now I have it's really odd to have the controls in front of my controls. But so University of California has a forest stewardship page, and I'm going to drop all these links in the chat when I'm done talking here. But this is a really great website for just in general learning the forest stewardship workshop like series. I swear if you read them all, you probably have an associate's degree in forestry. It's a tremendous amount of information. But what's nice is they're actually offering a workshop series right now. With the last workshop series is going to be for Sonoma County. So it's a $50 month-long Zoom workshop with a one-day, I think, in-person meeting that teaches forest landowners how to create a management plan. So that's distilling what your goals, objectives, your values, why do I own the property, what do I want to see the property look like in years from now, and give them the sort of understanding of like, how do we start to make forest treatments get us to where we want to be. So it's a really great opportunity, and it's required for some cost share programs to have a forest management plan. It's really encouraged with our North Bay Forest Improvement Program, but it's required if you were going to work with, say, CAL FIRE has the California Forest Improvement Program, very similar program, or one that I wanted to highlight is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have a program called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. It's been really good in the last couple years of consistently having funding. And what's interesting about the fact that we have a grant right now is that because our NRCS partners are a federal program and our funding currently is state level funding, we're trying to figure out ways to where we might be able to blend some of this and work in concert with NRCS to, make things easier for everybody and possibly bring costs down. So that's something that we're hoping to do. And the last resource is back onto planning again. This is a really great website that University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources came through, and it goes over all these basic sorts of steps for what it would take you to start moving your forest towards that condition that you're hoping for. So I will drop these down in the chat, and I guess I can stop sharing because that was really all that I had to do. The other thing I'll throw out there, and it was mentioned really early on, is there's the CWPP process. I think that's a really important step. I think that in general, neighbors communicating with one another and working on these collaboratively is something that's important. That's actually something that gets you higher up in our ranking system in the North Bay Forest Improvement Program, is whether or not you're working. Oh, thank you for dropping all those links. But yeah, whether or not you're working with your neighbors. And the reason why we care about this is because, one, larger projects generally have a lower per acre cost. So there's that. It has a larger landscape benefit to be thinking about beyond just your 10-acre parcel, right? Like, you live in a watershed. Your watershed is in a larger context, and all these things have downstream effects. And we really need to start thinking about how can we manage for a landscape level so that when we have fire, because we live in an area where we will have fire, we want to dictate the terms on how that fire moves through an area. So if we can be doing prescribed fire, or doing the prep work, the mechanical prep work through some program like EQIP or the North Bay Forest Improvement Program to get us set up so it's safe to do prescribed fire. Or in a case like the glass fire where we just had a fire, right? Well, we have a perfect opportunity to re-enter with fire in about 5 years from now, when we've just got enough growth that we can actually carry a fire. So what kinds of planning things do we need to get on the ground today so that we can do that? We want to start thinking now about what our long-term vision, what kinds of plants do we want back here? Because it really could be affected by that sort of burning regime. And there's some really great opportunities in the county right now with the prescribed burn associations that are going on, the Good Fire Alliance. I guess that's another, I could drop CalPBA for prescribedburnassociation.org. And that's really supposed to be neighbors helping neighbors to create sort of a collaborative effort for managing their properties, whether or not it's, doing a prescribed burn and learning more about what that means, and working with our volunteer fire departments or with CAL FIRE even. Marshall Tuberville is a great example of someone who's worked with the Prescribed Burn Association to get experience, to get people to learn how to do this sort of thing, so that then they can go and they can, take advantage of things that the state's moving towards in terms of burn boss certifications and liability concerns that is currently going on in the legislature. So, there's a huge ball, and it's moving in terms of the state dealing with this huge elephant, which is, living in an area that's dependent on fire. So I guess the one thing I didn't throw on there was my contact information. But I'll just drop that in the chat right now. The best way to reach me is usually email. So I will do that right now.
And Ariel will go ahead and send the contact information for all of our panelists out when she sends the notes for this meeting tonight. So thank you, Jason, so much.
Great. Thank you.
I really want to thank Yvonne Shu from the Office of Recovery and Resilience, and certainly Raymond Baltar talking about biochar, Jason Mills talking about the burned landscapes and recovery, Caitlin working with all of those great folks, and of course, Jason Wells from the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And Ariel will go ahead and send your contact information out to folks. But let me just start the first question, the prerogative of the chair. And you mentioned the Good Fire Alliance, the Sonoma Collaborative. There are so many great, amazing organizations, including the Ecology Center that's right in the middle of looking at public land as well as private land, prescribed burns, and all of the above. And I live in Oakmont, just below those virtual clouds. And those folks are freaking out. Just about everybody in Sonoma Valley is freaking out about, another dry year. Are we going to have another fire coming through here? And first of all, they want to know, can we clear cut every tree in all of the natural lands of Hood Mountain and Annandale so we don't have to worry about fire? No, we're not advocating that. But what are we advocating? To really push the opportunity for fires, the similar kind of fires that we've had in the past, off. What can we do to prepare the natural landscapes, our parks, state parks, regional parks? And whoever wants to answer that question, go to it.
That's a giant question. I'll jump in though. I mean, I think there are two answers. One is about what do we do to keep our houses from burning down? And the other is what do we do to keep our wildlands healthy and beautiful? And on the first topic about how do we keep our houses burning down, you got to start from your house and work out. The house is the most important thing. Then it's the 0 to 5 ember free zone. Then you work out from there. So if that house burning down fear is what makes you want to do something right now, that is where to focus. It's really a different question when you're thinking about how do we keep our wildlands healthy and happy. And that goes to, I'm happy to turn it over to either of the Jasons to talk about that, but we have a way to go on that because the forest fire frequency is going up, and we've had this whole history of not having fire and not managing our wildlands in other ways. There's a lot of reasons to manage our wildlands. That's where our water comes from, for example, where our wildlife comes from. So we need a multi-objective approach to those wildlands. I'll stop there.
I mean,
Thanks,
yeah.
Caitlin. And let me just say, we haven't really talked about home hardening, and probably should and will next, because Caitlin is right, starting at the house and working out, fencing and replacement events and a lot of other things that we hopefully will talk about maybe next month. So whichever of the Jasons want to jump in here, go right ahead.
Maybe I'll jump in first, Jason, then pass it over. But yeah, I mean, I just want to address the whole daylighting clear cutting issue, because, I think it's like a misnomer to think you can just remove vegetation. Just like Jason Wells said, once the land is bare, something will return. And essentially everything you take on becomes a perpetual maintenance project. And this doing vegetation management is expensive. So you really want to pick and choose where you want to focus your efforts. And a lot of times, you know, homeowners will take a big financial hit up front and remove just a ton of biomass, and then it all comes right back. It comes back worse. So what looks good in the short term doesn't get you the long-term results you're paying for. And that's why doing informed vegetation management is so important. And in a lot of cases, shade is your friend. The tree canopy is good. If you have shade, you can establish understory plants and create a shaded fuel break. Now, you don't want to have like a continuous stream of canopy going right to your house, but you also don't want to daylight the whole property and have to mow it forever. I mean, that's what you're really looking at, is, you know, doing this work forever. So I think I would just advise on developing a long-term plan and making some informed decisions.
Yeah,
And you can
I'll
start
just-
with RCD and the Sonoma Ecology Center. Absolutely. Go ahead, Jason.
I just wanted to second that. Yeah, like I said before, where there is light and there is soil, something's going to grow. And as Jason Mills pointed out, generally things grow slower when they're in shade. So it's not that we can do a shaded fuel break once and never touch it again. Like, things will grow. We're going to need to respond to that. So we need to plan out, how are we going to do that? What are we going to pay for that? We can manipulate through fire or grazing or, you know, mechanical means, whether or not that be mowing or actually paying people to go out there, depending on your site. I mean, there's a million qualifiers for what grows there naturally, right? But like, pretty easy to manage grass. It's a lot harder if you're in a forest to manage your fuels, but that doesn't mean that it's not doable. It just means you have to have a plan and follow that plan. And luckily there are resources that are available right now to help you get some of that work done. And so, yeah, I mean, the clear cutting thing, that's really not a long-term sort of plan. You'll get, I don't know, 6 months to a year before you have continuous fuels again in a clear cut. And so then even at that point, then you have to do pruning or whatever comes up. To when it comes to fire, it's all about continuity of fuels and the spatial orientation. So how those fuels are arranged, right? Like Caitlin was saying, the islands, the dense islands, a lot of wildlife really like dense vegetation. It's a good hiding spot. It stays wet for a long time. There's good qualities to that. But you create islands of that sort of thing so that when it catches on fire, it doesn't have an opportunity to spread. Or if you're talking individual trees, you space them out, you prune them up, you make it so that when a fire comes through, it burns really small. And one thing that's an important thing to remember is that when we talk about maintenance, there were people who were living here for 12,000 years, and they generally used fire as a way to cultivate foodstuffs and a landscape that best worked for them. So they were actively putting fire on the ground. And that fire, they talk about how many acres burned this year. It's something like 10% of the historical acreage of what would have been a normal burn year 300 years ago. The difference is the kind of fire that you're seeing, because you've got 100 years of, you know, really solid fire suppression. I mean, our firefighters are great at putting fires out. But what that means is that those fuels burn much more intensely. And when they burn much more intensely and hotter and longer, you end up killing trees that otherwise, on a small grass fire or a fine fuels that's burned every other year, every 5 years, it kills everything. So now we've built an infrastructure and we've made things a little more complicated, but the idea still remains the same, that these landscapes we live in require disturbance. And so we are working on figuring out how to do that. So next time you go and you're hanging out at Taylor Mountain and you step in a cow patty on accident, like I did, trying to take photos. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to having those cows out there in terms of carbon sequestration, and they're eating grass and it's returning to the soil and it's building and also there's a bit of a fuels component to that as well. Prescribed fire. There are things that we could be exploring, if there was a market to biochar or a way to get that material off your land, or developing innovative markets. One thing that's going on right now is there's this BioBiz competition that was sponsored by the Air Resources Board, and they're trying to figure out how to create some sort of alternative. Because I'll say, as a forester, right now, the only thing that will generate income on your property are saw logs. And so those are merchantable conifer trees that are bigger than 16 inches, cutting them down. And that's not really the best type of thing that we need to be cutting down for most of our fire response. There's caveats to that, and there's definitely for certain shaded fuel breaks and stuff, but like most of the work needs to be done in really small, non-merchantable material. So if we can find a way for someone to have a use for that, to pay for it, to get it off your land, even if that doesn't cover the full cost, but it covers some of it, that might be a huge benefit to you. Because I'll just throw out from the hip, a general number for doing the kind of work we're talking about here can be $2,000 to $3,000 an acre easily. And that's just for lop and scatter. That's not for pile burning. That's not for conservation stuff. That's definitely not for chipping. So that's why planning is really important too, and prioritizing where are we going to do what first, and then how are we going to build on the treatments that we just did. Because if we could do fire gets you down closer to a couple $100 an acre if you can go big. So it's a long-term strategy, a long-term planning thing, talking with your neighbors, figuring out how to collaborate on this sort of thing. There's not a lot of resource professionals out there. So the more that you can collaborate and have one person helping to think about how to manage a larger area than just a 10-acre parcel here and a 10-acre parcel here, that's going to be the way that we get in 20 years from now to a point where we might feel like we have tackled this fuels crisis.
Thanks, Jason. Let's get to some of the questions, and just a reminder to use the raise hand function on your Zoom to be recognized and promoted by Ariel to speak. And if you're on the phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. Ariel, do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing anyone raise their hand. So if you're being shy because you think a lot of other people have questions, please. Okay, there we go. So we have John Rothfield. John, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, just wondering if Buckeye, we lost a lot of the Doug firs along our creek, and I want to replant for privacy and for shade and to stabilize the bank. We are on the Van Buren Creek, and I was wondering what you thought of Buckeye. That was, I don't know if that's a good idea. It came to mind because I love the blossoms, but I don't know what would make good choices, but I would like to start planting as soon as PG&E finishes taking down the large heritage firs that we've lost.
And I did get a tiny little Buckeye at the Sonoma Ecology Center, the garden on East 7th Street. And it's leafing out, and I have great hopes for it. So what should she plant along a creek shed?
Oh, well, there's so many wonderful things you could be planting. But really, timing is everything. So,
right.
The time to plant is the fall with the rains. Unless you can set up some sort of irrigation system, then you're not too late. But really, plant survivorship will go way up if you plant with the coming rainy season. So we try to do our planting in December for the most part. So the roots can get established going into the following dry season. But, you know, when you're looking at like plant palettes and wondering about, you know, what plants are best for the space, you know, there's a big difference between conifers and hardwoods and broadleaf trees and little needles that are very flammable. You know, if you're looking at things like buckeye, that's a wonderful plant. Buckeyes and oaks are actually considered, you know, less flammable or fire resilient. I mean, they will burn. All vegetation will burn. So, you know, if you're looking at a really crowded area and all that vegetation is going to carry into the canopy and create, you know, a higher residence time and a higher heat index, or it's right up on your structure, those trees aren't going to be able to persevere. But if there's proper spacing, if there's no ladder fuels, then they can actually create somewhat of a defense to catch embers from reaching your house. You know, one thing that I've learned from going out and doing these site evaluations is once you get into the plant and you actually start looking in there, the embers want to land somewhere. They're looking for something to land on, kind of like a bird nest. And if they can get into that plant and land in that dead woody material underneath, it's just going to catch right up and get right up into the canopy. So you want to clear out all that lower vegetation and have that bigger wood, because the bigger diameter wood you have, the less flammable it is. So, you know, just going into what sort of native trees you have to plant out there. There's so many beautiful native trees in our riparian forests, big leaf maple, Oregon ash, yeah, box elder. When you're down in the water, you can go with alders. And then you've got your whole spectrum of oaks and cottonwoods and walnuts. So
What do you think? What about redbud?
Redbud, you know, it's not so native to most of Sonoma County, but it comes in right at that Lake County border. So I try to really work with like watershed specific natives, but it is native to California. It is beautiful. It is a you know, a nice woody shrub that has some bigger wood in diameter. So it's not as flammable as other shrubs. But again, you would want to really focus on that whole island approach and proper spacing. Redbud's nice because it's drought tolerant. And there's several redbuds out there. So you'll want to make sure you're buying your local redbud and not the Chinese cultivar.
Well, the problem is we have a lot of space.
And I have several redbuds that were not affected by the flames, and boy, are they gloriously blooming right now.
Oh, yeah.
So let's move on. But I wanted to say, yes, the Sonoma Ecology Center is a great place to look at for native plants on East 7th Street, but also the jail industries up by the airport now has a large variety of smaller plants at very inexpensive costs by the gallon, and rarely 5 gallon or 2 gallon or 5 gallon. Lot of natives, and you can make an appointment to go up there and take your plant identifier, because they're not always good at identifying what's being propagated there, but it's another good source of little shrubs and drought tolerant plants. We all live in deer habitat. Should we be caging our seedlings as we plant them?
That's a really good question too, Supervisor Gorin. I mean, it really depends on the species. So usually if it has a really like heavy aroma or spiny leaves, it can defend itself from herbivory or not be attractive to herbivores. But it's really like species specific. So like buckeyes, for example, everything loves to eat them when they're young. But then as they mature, they develop chemical resistance to herbivory. So, you know, it's a big factor on this is if you're going out and planting this time of year and you do set up an irrigation system, it's going to attract the ground critters. So the gophers and the ground squirrels are going to just come right in and devour them. So if you are using irrigation to get these plants started through the summer, I would recommend like gopher caging. And then the above ground stuff, if you have a lot of deer activity or cattle, it might be also worth putting in some vaca cages.
This is so complicated. Ariel, do we have any other questions?
We do. So next is Penny Sayorda. You should be able to unmute, Penny.
Hi,
Hi,
Penny.
everybody. It's good to see everybody's faces. Hey, it seems like it's so hopeful that this funding is going to be coming forward, but it seems like there's going to be kind of a scramble for it because decisions need to be made fast and there's a lot of need. So I've got two questions. One is, what can people be doing right now to get things lined up and ready so that when the invitation is put forward, people are already set up with the requests? And the second question is, given that there's so much need and a limit, what do you recommend so that there's more of a spirit of cooperation rather than competition? Because this is really about everybody working together to, help everybody.
Penny, those are great questions. And I was thinking particularly about you and the other fire safe councils. You have already developed your council and your CWPP, and you've prioritized some projects before the fire. We're not sure what your project list is going to be after the fire, but let's start with Yvonne. Yvonne, give us a sense of the timeline and what can Penny and other folks do to prepare for this?
Right, so the timeline is actually being developed right now, but we anticipate hopefully in the next couple weeks, getting that application out there. We want it to be a simple application. And so I would say in terms of preparation, maybe providing a brief narrative, a description of your project and what you hope to achieve and how that will be kind of maintained moving forward. As well, tying into the CWPP, as you mentioned, and indicating the readiness and how ready you are to go with that project, basically. And then in terms of, working with others, if you are part of a larger group, maybe, consider projects that might benefit, your whole neighborhood or a piece of your neighborhood, or maybe with like-minded fire safe councils kind of move forward with the same kind of effort. Maybe it's education or, outreach, that kind of thing.
Could I say a little bit more about that?
And can I just say, please emphasize permanent vegetation management. This is not for cutting down annual grasses. So we want to get to the place where this is actually going to aid us in the future, not just for this year. Go ahead, Caitlin, and then I'll go to Jason.
Well, I've just been listening to this whole, the whole vegetation management conversation pretty closely. I think what I've been hearing is that one of the things that's going to distinguish among projects that get funds are demonstrating risk is going to be important. So the places that have higher risk to homes are going to, I think, get some priority. And then, like the supervisor said, some projects that can show that there is some way to maintain the benefit over time, whatever that looks like, I think are going to win out. And in terms of cooperation, I agree with you, Penny. It's very hard to keep up with what everybody else is thinking about, even stuff that might be really close by where you live. I just asked the Forest Working Group to start an online spreadsheet where people could share their thoughts about the upcoming CAL FIRE proposal so that those projects can get together and collaborate. And I think maybe we could try to do the same thing through Forest Working Group. Just a really informal way so that we know what the heck each other are doing and we can combine where possible.
Caitlin, could you give us a little understanding of what the CAL FIRE proposal is and how people would access that information?
Well, CAL FIRE is a state agency, of course, and they are giving out a ton of money in grants, and they have a deadline that's coming up in May 19th. And they're funding both fire prevention projects and what do they call it? Forest health projects, which are projects that are meant to reduce fire risk, but they also are required to demonstrate that they increase carbon sequestration. So that's the idea, is healthier forests. Basically what that translates into fewer trees, but bigger trees, that's good for fire risk. Fewer and bigger trees is good. So CAL FIRE tends to want really, really big projects, which means you want a lot of organizations and groups getting together. And we can only do that if we know what each other are up to. So hence the reason for this spreadsheet. I could stick the links in the chat. I don't know how successful individual like fire safe councils will be going to CAL FIRE on their own. I think you generally, oh, there's Ariel, she's on it. I think it would probably be better to work with a nonprofit or local agency to, again, get a bunch of projects into one application.
Jason Wells, can you give us a primer? What are you looking forward for in a grant proposal?
Oh, for the North Bay Forest Improvement Program?
Hmm?
Oh, that's for ownerships, non-industrial forest ownerships between 5 and 500 acres. And that's really the only qualifier that we have. We prioritize individuals who are in census designated disadvantaged communities. That was a requirement from Prop 68. And yeah, we work on it. So the difference between that kind of program and like an incentives program is that that's the sort of thing that an individual landowner could reach out and work with us. So it's direct contracting. A CAL FIRE forest health or forest fire prevention grant is a $1 million+ project that you're going to require to have either a local government, a state government, or a nonprofit 501c3 type entity applying for. They're very competitive. And I totally agree with Caitlin. I was thinking about this the other day because I'm working with a group in Cazadero, and I know that there's another group in Occidental, and I know that there are fire safe council groups in Sonoma Valley, and I know everybody's going to be trying to go for this. So I'm hoping that we can at some point talk about how to put in, because what's different this year than previous years is it doesn't seem like there's a cap, an upper cap on what CAL FIRE is asking for. And in the past, we've been told that they want targeted $500,000 projects. But if there's no upper cap, we should try to do as big as we can with major artery roads and get something done. That's what I'm hoping.
Yvonne, I know the county has applied through Permit Sonoma for $50 million vegetation management grant, but is anyone from the county looking at the CAL FIRE grant potential?
You know, I am not 100% sure. I think maybe Parks has some of that, might be looking into that. Permit Sonoma, I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know.
Okay.
They're a little busy with the brick grant right now.
All right, I want to know who to bug.
Okay.
So, thank you.
I mean, it's really all the more reason for outreach and community engagement. I mean, you got to bring these homeowners together, and we got to start looking at it on a watershed scale.
And this is a really good discussion for us because, as you just mentioned, a number of grant opportunities through the state, and I suspect we will have more opportunities through the federal government and the state government, NRCS. Certainly you talked about because people are really concerned about how the wildfires have affected western part of the United States. So they're looking at ways that they can invest funding to help make our communities more resilient. So I think that what we're seeing this year is increased grant opportunities that may play out over the next couple of years. Ariel, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we have 2 questions remaining. So this is a phone-in person. Your phone number is the last 4 digits are 9194. So I'm going to allow you to speak, and I think you have to hit *6 to unmute, if I'm remembering that correctly.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Great. This is Thea. I live on St. Helena Road, and I wanted to go back to the planting of native plants. What we've heard here at Mona's Row is that a lot of the native plants that are grown in nurseries can be carriers of sudden oak death. So we've been pretty hesitant to buy native plants. And I was just wondering if the Ecology Center has developed any ways to avoid that in the plants they're propagating.
Absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, because that is one knock on the jail facility, is that when you have the plants down on the ground, they're more susceptible to waterborne pathogens, and that's what Phytophthora sudden oak death is. So we're following BMP protocols, which is pretty much the plants have to be 4 feet off the ground, the pots have to be sterilized, the soil has to be sterilized, the watering wands have to be elevated. We use a lot of rubbing alcohol to sterilize everything. And the last thing you want to do is introduce Phytophthora to your landscape. So thanks for being considerate about that. I think, Phytophthora is most active in the rainy season. So as we approach the dry season, it's a better time to go buy soils. If you can't afford the sterilized stuff, I try to buy from the hottest, most sun-exposed site I can find. And I try to buy my plants from the cleanest facilities I can find. And it's good to bring it up with your local suppliers and say, are these plants BMP grown? And it's especially important in wildland urban interface areas where your landscaping plants could potentially spill out into the wild. So thanks for raising that point.
Thank you. Good question and good response. I just learned something. All right, way to go. Next question.
We have Mike with no last name. Mike, you should be able to unmute yourself. I'm asking you to unmute now.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is regarding 75 acres off of St. Helena Road, which is a bunch of cut down PG&E trees. My question, and we did, like you talked about, there is a neighborhood of about 20 people that have gotten together to pay a forester to come in, and it's really divided the costs up, and that's starting in a couple of weeks, as soon as we get the permit. But I was curious, at the beginning you talked about properties cleared by May 1st, and I didn't know what that meant. I think Susan, you might have mentioned that.
That's debris removal.
That is the debris removal that Ariel talked about, the timeline for the cleanup of the actual footprint of your site. It has less to do with vegetation management and cleanup than it does with the ashes of the footprint of your structures.
Oh, okay, so this has to do with structures that are burned down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's Cal OES's current estimate. I think they have returned about 40 parcels, or they're nearing that in the. It's not just the glass fire; it's also the LNU, the Wall Bridge, and the Myers. So, I mean, there's over 300. So, I hope they can hit that for the folks that are waiting for that, but I'm a little skeptical.
Okay, we're one of the rare properties that watered and kept the houses, and everything else is burned around it. So I guess that really wouldn't apply to us.
Right, and I'm so glad that you were able to save your house. Good work.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
And we do have one last person, if you will indulge them. This is a Todd Podal. Todd, you should be able to unmute.
Yes, so it's great news to have a date on the calendar when the debris removal may be finished. Do we have any estimates on when the soil sampling test will be finished so that we can start doing our core testing and those sort of things so we can move ahead with building? Because right now we're on hold because of that.
What I've heard about that, Todd, is that there were many delays. I got reached out to by many folks about that. They are starting to turn them around. It's not the county, so Cal OES takes the soil sample and they send it to their own labs. So they did get kind of a backup there, but I've heard they're starting to come back. So I heard some folks got it in about 3 weeks or a month. You can follow up with me directly, and I'd be happy to try to poke on yours if you're outside of that timeline. But everything's just moving a little slower than anyone would like.
And a follow-up question to that, our site needed a re-scrape. Does that mean we go back to the end of the line on the soil testing then, or how does that gonna affect us for the timeline?
I don't know if Supervisor Gorin wants to address that. I'm not sure about the intricacies of that program because it's not the county's program. But if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to try to find out for you.
Please reach out to Ariel and we'll try to get some information for you on the timing of that. Fortunately, my property didn't need a rescrape, but it's my understanding that no, you don't go at the end of the line, that they are continued to work on your property with the efficiency and speediness that you deserve. So, but let us know what property you are and we'll try to get some information on the timeline. I think it's that time. I really want to thank our panelists. Great discussion. And of course, as usual, it generates more questions and more opportunities to present some information. We've done through the past 4.5, well, almost 4 years, we've done a number of public meetings regarding vegetation management, home hardening, environmental resilience, and what to do with your lot. And sadly, we keep having fires. So we're going to continue the conversations and keep our fingers crossed. No fires this year, no more families having lost their houses. But we really appreciate the expertise. We have learned through the fires what it is and how we can be helpful with the community. Need to thank Yvonne Shu from the Office of Resiliency and Recovery and the Sonoma Ecology Center, just this great wealth of information, and Jason Mills from the Ecology Center, Raymond Baltar for the Biochar project, of course, Caitlin Cornwall, and the other Jason Wells. You're going to get tired of being called the other Jason, but I know many, many Jasons of your age. It was a really popular name way back 30, 40 years ago anyway, from the Sonoma Resource Conservation District. And always thank you to my great team members of the District 1 team with our new district director, Ariel Kubu-Jones, who've been with us for all of the fire survivor conversations. She is an incredible resource in her own right, and I can't thank her enough. So please be safe and please practice water conservation as you're looking at vegetation management. And as the grasses are drying up, please note that do not cut those grasses during the hot afternoon sun. Cut them in the morning if you're going to cut them to prepare for the fire season. We don't want you accidentally starting fires. So be safe, and we will see you next month. Thank you all.